Okay, starting things off, the hook that we're going to use for the Mini Leech Jig Radiant is a 60-degree jig hook, the XT500. And the great thing about the jig hook at 60 degrees is you get a larger opening or gap, which when the fish takes the fly, it almost penetrates and pinch it and stays in the corner of the jaw. So when you debarb this, you're not going to have to worry about as many fish shaking out of their jaw in mid-battle. Next up is going to be the bead, the Radiant series slotted beads with Umpqua. This is going to be in pink. We're also going to use micro mink in white. So remember, micro pine squirrel was the original material used for the Mini Leech Jig Radiant, but in white you can only find it in mink. They don't actually bleach it for the micro pine squirrel. Thread we're going to use is 70 UTC, and then Loctite super glue, my favorite adhesive. You'll look like a cheerleader with this giant ostrich plume. We're going to use white plumes for the collar, and then for the body we're going to use crystal flash. And a little secret, so when you pull this out of the package and it doesn't turn into a bad hair day, just cut a arrow shape on the bottom of the bag and you can pull out one strand at a time. And pink's going to represent the body. I'll oftentimes match the bead color to the crystal flash color on the body just to give it that even look and tone. So starting behind the bead, using a short tag end of thread. I always recommend the tag end of thread you want to use here is about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. I'm going to rotate the thread over the hook shank, moving away from my body and starting to go towards the bend of the hook. You'll notice you have a tag end, which I believe in developing into a ramp. So if I lift that up at an angle, every time I'm wrapping back, I get nice even wraps moving down the body. Gives you even segmentation all the way through to the bend. We'll stop just past the hook point, come up with the scissors, and we're going to cut that tag end flush. And then we'll come in with the pink crystal flash. And the secret for applying crystal flash on the Mini Leech Jig series, whether it's this, the Radiant series, or the Mini Leech Jig itself. In the past, I would attach a tag end at the bend of the hook. And the challenge here is sometimes you miss grabbing the material or it rotates to the other side of the hook shank. Instead, if we grab a piece about 4 to 5 inches in length and we bend this around the thread, I'll then elevate the thread up, slide this down to the hook shank, and I'll wrap back on top of the crystal flash 2 or 3 times to secure it down. Then I'll move forward with the thread towards the bead. And don't worry about the bead sliding back. We don't want to build a bump there because we want to make sure we have a smooth runway when we complete this fly. When we apply the ostrich, it needs to be flat on the front end. So we'll stop there with the thread. And I like to call it the pinch method. I'm using pinchers on my dominant and non-dominant thumb and index fingers, and this gives me control of the material. I'll then lift the material up. I'll rotate it over the hook shank and trade off below. It also helps me avoid the hook point. And if you get a little separation, it's fine. We're just going to continue to wrap towards the eye. And you're trying to develop a nice smooth body and even segmentation along the way. I'll stop about a bead's length behind the bead, apply one loose wrap, a second loose wrap, switch to my dominant hand and secure wrap twice. I'll then come back with the back of my scissors and I'm going to cut that tag end flush. Wrap those tag ends forward and then again wrapping back, building up and establishing that flat or smooth runway. At this point in the tie, I want to make sure the body's durable, so I'm going to use Loctite super glue. And the secret here is, I don't know about you, but as a full-time guide and full-time tyer, I have about 5,000 magnets sitting all over the lab in the office. And I figured, okay, what am I going to do with this? Well, if I apply 1 drop of Loctite super glue on top of the magnet, it stays moist for up to 2.5 hours. And the advantage you have there is because oxygen doesn't penetrate the super glue, it remains moist, and then we can come back with a small piece of wire, dip that in the Loctite super glue, and then I get micro droplets, and I can simply wipe those on top of the crystal flash, making the body incredibly durable. And Loctite super glue adheres clear. It doesn't flake off in cold weather. It really is ideal. Now, when we're applying the micro mink, I like to use a section that's about 1.5 inches to 1 inch in length. I leave these relatively long, so when I'm on the water, I can cut back when necessary. And I don't know about you, but when I turned 18, I took a shower, all my hair fell out. So this is my excuse to work with the Mohawk. Unfortunately, it's there, but it's always fun trying to design these flies. Now, the biggest question I receive about the Mini Leech Jig series is, do you apply it with the skin facing the hook shank or facing up and away? And the correct way to tie this in is we want this up and away from the hook shank. It prevents fouling, allows the fly to jig properly, and it also slows the sinking or descent rate down, so I can toss this below a dry fly and it's not going to sink or pull down my dry. The other reason I picked white is numerous times on the water, we're out fishing deep runs, and an angler with a conventional rig would come up and use a giant white tube jig and absolutely start hammering in the deep run. At that point, I look at my client, I'm like, okay, we got to go upstream. We can't stay here any longer. This guy's crushing fish and we're not. Then I decided, you know what, let's design an imitation that's white, apply pink on the front end with a little bit of flash, and now we too can jig deep in those runs and become more successful. So at this point in the time, I'm going to use the trick of the pinch method. I'm going to pinch the vise, the hook, and the material and do one loose wrap and then let go. And this allows me to gain control of the material on top of the hook shank. And you can see we have that nice, beautiful curvature going up and to the left. Now, what I'm doing here is measuring the skin behind the bead. I don't want to crowd the bead, and I want to develop the body as best as possible. So that looks about even. We're matching the distance of the thread base we built, and then we'll start moving forward with secure wraps towards the bead. And you can see now why it's not necessary to build the bump behind the bead, because we're going to secure that bead in now. So we're going to go all the way up with the thread to the bead, wrap that all the way back, stopping where we started, and you can see that nice, even, flat runway. Now, when you're using ostrich, it's a wonderful material, but very challenging when you first start working with it. What you'll notice about ostrich is on one side, there's going to be a spine, and then the other side is going to be V-shaped fibers coming off of the spine. You'll see that here. So we have a spine facing up, the materials down or facing to the left. If I tilt that at an angle of 45 degrees, I want to ensure I have it in the right place. So I'm going to do one loose wrap and let go. The secret is that we want the spine facing the eye of the hook or the bead. We want the material facing the bend. That way, when I wrap this forward, that material is going to flare out to the left and stand up nice and tall. It really is the best way to apply ostrich to the hook or the hook shank. Once I'm secure in knowing that that spine is facing the eye, I'll secure wrap forward, getting rid of that tag end of ostrich, and then using the pinch method again, thumb and index or thumb and middle finger on both hands, I'll start wrapping the ostrich, moving towards the bead. And on the Mini Leech Jig series, whether it be the regular or the Radiant that we have here, I like to build up a larger collar. I'm really maximizing to where if I have, let's say, black and orange, it's an egg-sucking leech. In this situation, just simply the attractor. So we're trying to mix and match to the best of our abilities. And if it breaks, we're all human, we'll go back, try that again, some smooth wraps, moving all the way towards the bead, securing the fly down. And I'll move all the way up right behind the bead. And again, we're trying to make sure it's nice and full. I'll then come up with one loose wrap, a second loose wrap. I'll pull that material back and I'll do a couple secure wraps behind the bead. Any stragglers left over, we can clean those up later. I'll cut that tag end fairly short, get rid of any extending material on the top, fluff that all away. And then we're going to come in with our whip finish tool. And just remember, when we whip finish, we want to make sure that we're securing the fly to the best of our ability and know that it's not going to mess up the knot or the proportions of the collar. Now, the secret to the whip finish tool is you're going to have a handle with a ball on top. We want to pinch that ball and we leave forward the hook and the metal notch in the back. I'm simply going to hook the thread, keeping a hold of that ball, and then I'll lift the tag end up over the notch. And as I do this, I'll slide my fingers down from the ball to the handle on the whip finish tool and I form that arrow. I'll then move that arrow around behind the bead twice, lift up the notch, pull down the hook, and I'll do this a second time. I'm securing this with 2 knots, making sure that everything's nice and tight and secure, and it's going to give strength to my imitation. Then with the blade and my scissors, I'm going to come up underneath the bead and the collar, and I'm going to slice with the blade like a knife through butter. And the reason I do that is now that tag end is going to lift up, disappear into the thread collar base behind the bead, and it gives you a little bit more of that clean, stylish look. You don't have to worry about any of the material being caught. And that is the Mini Leech Jig Radiant series, white micro mink, white ostrich, pink bead, and this is on a 60-degree jig hook, XT500. And then lastly, that pink crystal flash on the body to match the collar. A wonderful attractor pattern that really will get a lot of those aggressive takes from predatory trout.